May I? Yeah? Okay. Good afternoon to you all. It's a very intimate and familiar audience. So thanks for taking the time. I'm moderating this conversation. Those who don't know me by name, it's Russell, surname, it's Lawai, based here. And I've been up since 5 this morning. A bit of a crisis since yesterday, so my mind is not very well consolidated. So this is the first of a series of talks hosted by ASAI here at the ARC, the Arts Resource Center. It is a space that we share with Arts and Humanity, and it is ASAI's first physical presence in Durban, at least. And the space exists primarily as a resource center, so we have an extensive, very interesting library, and the idea is to initiate in-person activations, interventions, and so on. And so this kind of marks the first of a public moment. This would be the first public moment that is initiated and managed by ASAI. And it's one of four talks.
It's more than 4, but until February next year.
Cool. And part of the intentions of the talks is to make sense of the ecosystem in Durban, I think, to kind of put it plainly, whilst teasing out the complexities of fault lines and overlaps of the ecosystem that existed, draw from and contribute to. And so each talk is themed, and today's talk is thinking and reflecting around the question of sustainability in Durban. Thinking quite broadly about what sustainability is and what we can take from that. And to kind of do that, to tease that out, we've invited 2 presentations, Mario Pissarra and Angela Shaw. Mario will be talking about ASAI as an organization that came out of a kind of web interest, websites, if you will, web blog. And from there kind of mushroomed to take on a bunch of other priorities that I thought were important to hold at the time in South Africa's cultural landscape. Angela will be reflecting, drawing from a master's thesis, the history of the KZNSA Gallery, an institution that is not only important in Durban, South Africa, and one dare say worldwide. It's one of the few institutions in Durban that we rely on, many of us rely on. And so it would be interesting to kind of hear how the organization with a history, a track record of 20 years, which is ASAI, compares or kind of lives alongside a much longer history of an institution, which is the KZNSA Gallery, for example. And from these 2 examples, how do we think of sustainability? How do we think of collaboration? How do we think of resourcing and making meaningful work? So each speaker has about 15 minutes for their presentation. I'll then come in with some questions, and then hopefully through that process we can start to do a much more conversational flow rather than a kind of Q&A, as it was. Simply because we're much smaller. I wonder if this covers the, let's say, formal aspects. It does, yes. So I've jotted down some notes. So in some way, this is how I've been trying to think of today's session and what it means for me and how I'm making sense of it. So I'm just going to read this down quite digitally, so bear with me, or else I'll go off tangents and I'll digress and so on. So bear with me. It's not as refined as the presentations that we'll hear, but I think it's important to start with this because I think it lays the premise and the ground grounds for us to follow. So just trying to understand this question in my own head. Why is it important? Why is this question important in the now and in for Durban? For one, it is important to understand the ecosystem in which one operates and lives. And the case in point is this catalogue that I picked up just a few minutes ago. I did not know there was once a town, and I thought I knew enough about Durban, and so this is why it's important, I think, to kind of make sense and try to understand the present in relation to the past. The state of Durban is weird, to put it mildly, but in many ways what's happening in Durban is a microcosm of what's happening in South Africa and by extension the world. We're working in a center where the flows of resources have drastically shifted. Equally so, the so-called old guard still has 1 foot in and 1 foot out. Meanwhile, I wonder how many new voices have been given room to come into their own and claim space. To be specific about this, if you map the network of actors and activities in Durban over the past 15 years, and to do the same mapping today reveals a concerning picture. Equally important, however, is to acknowledge the younger and unique voices who have hijacked the crisis. In an ecosystem where there are no arts foundations, as Durban, in an ecosystem where there are no arts foundations, no international museums, and small pockets of giving, private donors, etc. Against that negative perception is activity in Durban. It may be small, self-driven, and precarious, where it exists. We have actors and initiatives, not so much institutions, which in most cases are the bedrock of society. And I think these two presentations will shed light on two initiatives that have come to be, what has sustained them, how have they contributed to their respective constituencies. In closing, sustainability is not only about random cents. In my view, it's an equation that factors in artistic vision, sustaining livelihoods, it's about effective governance, and partaking in the social flux. In other words, bringing meaning to and from the society in which an institution or organization is located. So this is how I've been thinking about how we can think about sustainability in a broader context. And I think in some way or the other through our preliminary conversations, some of what I've raised here will be discussed in greater detail in these presentations that are to follow. I think that's good enough as a pretext. And Manuel will hand over to you to maybe get us going.
Okay, thank you, Russell.
Should I time you?
You know I go down the rabbit hole, so you probably should. Thanks everyone for being here for what I really do feel like is a historic moment. It's taken 5-6 years to get to this point, actually. This is the one rabbit hole I'm going down already. Which was trying to find a partner in Durban for this concept of the resourcing. This idea to create a space that could be of benefit to the broader Durban art ecosystem and beyond, not just the operational base or a single organization. So it's really great to be at this point, and thank you all for being here. As Russell mentioned, ASAI really started as a website 20 years ago. And we've come quite a long way. I don't really want to talk about all the work that's on the website. I think you can access that material. It's a very content-rich website, and a number of projects that are ongoing that are hosted on the website. But we have increasingly been doing real-time projects, and the Resource Center is really, in our history, very unique in the sense of, we weren't conceptualized like the KZNSA or many other organizations that start with the premise of space. Our space initially was virtual. So it's been a process whereby we've increasingly been engaging outside of the web space, and now having this physical space that, as Russell says, we share with Art for Humanity. So I think I wanted to kind of focus on the fact that as an organization we haven't had a very successful history in terms of raising a lot of funds. And it has to some extent restricted what we've been able to do, but we've been able to do a lot with TARP funds. So it's not to suggest that organizations shouldn't be financially supported because they must just be resourceful and creative and tap into other people's funds. But I wanted to focus on that aspect of it, rather than speak to our fundraising as such. And I think the initial point that I want to make is that, well, not the point, but I often say to people that when I started ASAI as a website, and then it was really me in loose collaboration with a network of within all Cape Town-based artists, I took a decision to not fundraise for 2 years. And that was because of two things. The one is that I had seen so many organizations rise and fall. There'd be funding behind a particular initiative. You get huge projects. I'm not going to name them because then I'll go down many rabbit holes. People really came and made a huge bang. And in 5 years they were gone. And you Google them today and you can almost find nothing. Perhaps they printed some material and you can find that if you look hard in various archives, etc. But a lot of organizations didn't really leave much of a legacy, but made a huge impact in a small time. But one can ask about that impact really, in the sense that after the money was gone, they were gone. So I thought, okay, what is possible to do without money? Obviously, at some point, one is going to need money, especially if you want to scale. So that was the one point. And then the other thing is really looking back on ASAI 20 years and saying, there have been periods that we've had almost no money. How is it that I'm actually sitting here today saying we're at the beginning of a new chapter, and this is the Resource Center project, and really feeling like we're at the starting point, really at such an early point of development. So within ASAI, we have had quite a bit of our own conversations around, how does one sustain the organization? What are the things you need to actually have in place? So it's a very simplistic diagram. But I think, the thing I'm trying to get away from is to say, as I've said, funding is necessary for sustainability, but you can't. Funding is not a synonym for sustainability. Sustainability requires a lot more elements to be involved. So let's acknowledge funding there, it's important. But really at the heart of it is the question of rationale. Why do you exist? Do you have a real purpose to exist? Because many projects are born because there's a funding call, and okay, now I'm going to work with these designated groups and I'm going to do this kind of activity because that's what the call is. So now we will have activity. But in 5 years, that funding call isn't there anymore. Will that organization still be there? So why do you exist? And secondly, can you give shape to that in terms of the actual work you do, the projects you do? So that's why I put rationale and projects really at the heart of it. Because if there's no particular reason to be, well then you may as well close shop when there's no money to pay for anything. So then this question of partnerships and collaborations has really been central for us, and I'm going to go into that in a little bit more. When I talk about people, I'm talking about the people who make up the organization, make up the nucleus of the organization. And of course, you have to have other key components in place: administration, marketing. We often get told that people don't even know we exist 20 years later, that our profile is so still below the radar, despite the website, despite all the work we've done. So I can't go down all these spaces in terms of all these things, but these are all different elements that are critical. But it does start with people. It does start with, is there a shared vision? Is there a core group of people who share that vision, who actually want to work together, who will be there when there's no money, and who will do what is possible when there is no money? Ultimately, that's what it's going to boil down to. So I think when we look at people, if you look at the, sorry, I'm on to the next one. If you look at the lines coming down, I'm not a great graphic designer, we're living on PowerPoint. I've got voluntary coming down and I've got professional on the other side. So by that I mean, on one hand, we have an organization, we have membership, and at the core of that we have members who are elected as as directors. And I'm pleased to just acknowledge that some of those people are here today. Russell, our treasurer, former chairperson, Renette, our chairperson. So the board is at the heart of the organization in terms of the work. When we have a broader membership, we usually keep that around 20 people. And then we have broader people out there who were members or who support us or can sometimes volunteer for small tasks, who help with distributing the book, doing this or that out there. So there's this onion that's the people of ASAI. And those people are there whether there's funding or there's no funding. Okay. Then on the other hand, we need to employ staff. We have certain service providers, whether it's accountants, work support, etc. Then we need to, for projects, with project funding, we employ a designer, we employ specific people to come in. So that's the people element. But ultimately, it really does come back to, is there a nucleus of people who have a shared vision, who are going to be there when it does get rough, even if that means scaling down activity, etc. So that's all I want to say about people. I think when we look at partnerships, what I'm presenting here is not the ideal situation. This is a reflection on how it has been for us over the last 20 years. Who has partnered with us? And is it possible to group them in clusters rather than name this organization that one? Universities is quite a consistent sector that we have worked with. Non-profits. I'm just going to make a quick comment here about non-profits. Interestingly, in Cape Town, we had very little collaboration with non-profits. I think the situation is going to be quite different in Durban. That's maybe something worth talking about at some point. But we also have relationships with international non-profits. And that's also helped us quite a lot in terms of, that's how we got to the Dakar Biennale, that's how we got to book fairs in Berlin, that's how we got to book fairs in Paris, all through those kind of partnerships. So non-profits are an important partner. Generally, the lines I'm using, the very thick line is where the partnerships are strongest, have been strongest. So then one can also look at public galleries and museums, private bookstores, print studios, the corporate sector. So all those are comparatively weak. Our main partnerships have been with universities and non-profits. Now, the other exercise I did was to map that to the work that we do. So whether you look at the workshops we run, our projects, digitizing and creative archives, the exhibitions we've done, and our publications. Those are kind of 4 strong pillars of the work that we've been doing. So I then matched those to those different sectors. And it was a very interesting exercise because, again, it showed if we work with universities, what do we work with universities on? So, for example, our workshop program is strong with universities. Our archival project has been good with universities. We've had exhibitions with universities. And then it's much weaker on publications. Now, you can have a whole conversation why that's the case. So this is just an exercise to really look at where we've been. I don't want to get too much into that. Let's move on. But I think what I tried to do from that exercise was to say, what forms did the collaboration take? Can we say that it took a particular shape? So the one key one is what I'm calling project-based access to facilities. Am I over my time?
No, you've got maybe 8 minutes now.
Okay, I'm speeding through this. Okay. So for example, the print workshop programs that we do. We've worked with 4 universities and we have another 5 universities that want to work with us. In all those situations, we access university facilities. The exhibitions we've had have been mostly with galleries, so we've never paid to hire space. I like to share this anecdote. We have only once paid to share space, and that was for 4 hours in a meeting in Toyando, because we were using the boardroom of an NGO and they needed that money for income generation. We always work in spaces that someone else has paid already. Obviously, we're bringing something to the partnership. But it saves us in our budgets. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're working with people who have a print studio. We don't now have to create a print studio. There are print studios. The other is more kind of long-term access in terms of spaces where we can actually base ourselves as an organization. So we've been at UCT since 2008. We still have an office at UCT. and the space is also doubling up as an operational base for us. There are instances where there's a little bit of financial support that comes on occasion, but usually it comes more in the form of when you partner around a program and an organization says, okay, we'll carry the cost for that, we'll carry the cost for that, and then from the budgets that we've raised, we pay the other elements. And endorsements in terms of financial support. The fact that we can get letters from a number of institutions and organizations all affirming the work that we do, that's also important in terms of assisting us when we fundraise. I don't know whether this is the way to describe it, collaboration through complementarity. What I'm trying to say is when you've got issues or concerns that are shared by other organizations. So for example, it took me 5 minutes of chatting to Ismail Farouk around the resource center after 5 years of meetings in the city and the province trying to get a space. To say, why don't you share with FH? Which then was, okay, now we set up a meeting with, then it was Rachel Bosch, who was the research, Renette was the dean at the time. I mean, it all just happened so easily because people could see that what we had to bring was also broadly in line with what they were trying to do. So that's why I'm saying, it might be the wrong way to label it, but when you actually share, you've got a shared vision and you're able to then actually work together. And then there's been other cases where we've gone into projects where we've actually just divided the responsibilities. And I think the best example was when we worked on Lionel Davis's retrospective. Because we worked with District 6 Museum, we said, okay, you curate the show, we will do the book. And we worked together through that whole project. Because we learned before, when we curate and we do the book, it's a lot for a small organization to do. So I think those are how I describe the different forms that this has taken. Through doing this particular exercise, one also gets to see where the gaps are. You know, who we're not working with, where are we not getting support, and where is it that we really are faltering in terms of where we need partnerships and where we need support. So the one is that, you know, we publish, we don't do a lot of print publishing, but we do some, and we struggle with book distribution. So, you know, we don't have those partnerships. I'm going to wrap up after this. And the other really key one is that, of course, every organization is pressured to generate its own income. And we feel like we have goods, we have products, we have books, we have prints that are produced from workshops, artists that make prints in exchange for being in the workshops, but we don't have access to markets. And this is something we've been struggling with for a few years. We don't have those relationships, we don't know those people, we don't have those networks that can really open that door for us. So I just wanted to also highlight that because I don't want it to look like, hey, fantastic, we talk to everybody, we work with everybody, we can do what we like. We fall short in many respects, and I think one has to then be more intentional in saying, okay, where do we need to go to get that support? So I think what I want to conclude with is just a very general statement, which is to say that I think that the key issue is really finding one's place in the ecosystem. Defining what it is that one wants to do, that is necessary, and how that fits in and boosts the ecosystem as a whole. And I think that is really, for me, I think that's really what is necessary if you're going to sustain yourself. Because if you're going to be a one-issue organization, you know, a campaign on that, maybe it's important to do that. I don't want to belittle that. But when that issue is no longer the issue, then you've run your course. Fine. Not every organization needs to last forever. But if you have a broader vision, which is, for example, to say that we need to be collaborating with organizations to strengthen the sector as a whole, then, okay, where are we in this sector? Where do we fit? And then how do we then relate to other people? Because I think it's through that that we're able to establish partnerships. So those are my humble remarks. Thank you very much for listening.